Hello and welcome back, guys. The podcast has returned. It's been a little while since we've had a new episode, but things have shifted here in my workload and I'm ready to restart this project. And I thought I would make things more interesting for myself, push myself to step out of my comfort zone. And I'm now recording these podcasts, which if you're watching this on YouTube now, you're like, duh. But if you are listening to this and you want to watch instead and you want to see that I have some new glasses and a jazzy fleece on, then you can go check it out on YouTube. Just search for Chloe Made Me Study. So I'm really excited to be back and I will be sharing a bit more about what I've been up to because I have been working on a qualification that I started a few years ago, and there's been some bumps in the road, some ups and downs, which I will definitely go into in future episodes. But I've now submitted my final assignment for it. So I'll find out in a few months if I've passed. Hopefully I have. And if I have, then I will be qualified as a specialist study skills and support tutor to specifically teach adult learners with specific learning differences. Quite a wordy job title, really, isn't it? So I'm currently working out how that's going to go in my email signature, but it means that I will have a qualification in teaching study skills and supporting students who have learning differences such as dyslexia and ADHD. And the thing that I've loved about this qualification is I can see how it can apply to all learners, all adult learners, because a lot of the difficulties that neurodivergent students struggle with, a lot of the studying difficulties around working memory and processing and focus, these are all things that, to an extent, can affect all students. Like, for instance, I am neurotypical. I don't have these learning differences, but I am someone who has struggled a lot with my mental health over the last kind of 5 to 10 years. And when I am experiencing a low point, if I'm experiencing a bout of depression or anxiety, then I notice my cognitive abilities, my cognitive capacity is impacted. And so what I've loved about this qualification is that I have been learning how to support specifically neurodivergent students, but also it's going to kind of embed itself into all of my teaching and support going forward. So I'm really looking forward to kind of bringing it into my content and sharing some of the things I've learned, but also baking it into my trainings, my workshops, my membership, and everything like that. And so I wanted to bring the podcast back with a topic that I have learned more about in my course, but I think is relevant to all students. And that is around overwhelm and kind of brain capacity. Because I'm sure there are plenty of times where you've sat down to study and it feels like your brain's just shut down or it's overloaded. You know, you might stare at the page and there's just like so much to do, so much to think about that you are frozen, right? Maybe you just stare into space, you pick up your phone, you scroll through your emails, you get up to make tea again. You know, you want to focus, but you can't seem to get going. And I know that I've experienced this definitely with the final push to get my portfolio, my teaching portfolio done, where you have so much to do, right? And sometimes you don't know what to do, but sometimes you know exactly what to do. You know the next 1 or 10 or 100 steps, but you just can't do them. And it feels like your brain is just full and you can't seem to get into focus. You can't seem to get your thoughts down on paper or on the page. Now, this is normal, right? This does not mean that you are broken. It doesn't mean that you're bad at studying. It doesn't mean that you're lazy, like, at all. It is a sign that you are in cognitive overload. So in this episode, I'm going to tell you a bit about cognitive overload. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how our memories work. And if you are someone with a learning difference, such as dyslexia or ADHD, you might be aware of some of these terms or some of these difficulties. And then I'm going to share some strategies on how you can overcome these. How can you actually make it easier on your brain? How can you reduce the cognitive load so that you can move forward with your studying? You can move forward on a task that you're feeling stuck on. You can get more done in your week. Always we're looking here on this podcast, in everything I do, on how can we study smarter? How can we study more efficiently and effectively so that the process feels a bit easier, but also so that you can get more done in less time, right? You can get higher grades without having to spend so many hours at your desk. So let me go into what cognitive load is. And I'm going to just talk a little bit, the kind of layman's terms, on memory, right? So we have different types of memory. We have sensory memory. So that is information that kind of comes in and immediately starts fading. So, if I'm at my desk and I hear kind of children walking outside, I kind of hear that and then it leaves my memory. And then we have short-term memory. So this is only about 20 to 30 seconds, and you can hold something. It might be that you are looking up an address. You're kind of thinking, right, what number street do I have to go to? And you hold that number in your mind just long enough to get to the right place. We have long-term memory. That's where we store things more permanently. We also have working memory. So working memory is sometimes likened to short-term memory. It's kind of used interchangeably. But working memory, the clue's in the title, it's where you're working. It's your brain's mental workspace where you juggle and you process things. So this is very much needed for studying. And if you are, and it's for lots of different activities. So like if you're reading a fiction book in your spare time, you're using your working memory when, you start reading a sentence and it mentions a character's name. You are holding that character's name in your mind as you read the rest of the sentence to find out what happens to that character or what they say. Without working memory, you wouldn't be able to follow a book. You wouldn't be able to follow a TV show, really, because it's the idea that you're holding information in one part of your brain and then doing something with it. And obviously we're going to need that for studying, right? Especially when you're working on, like if you're studying a maths-based subject, you need your working memory to do like mental maths, right? To hold kind of calculations in one part and then build on it in the other part. When you're working on assignments, you're reading kind of the relevant notes that you've made about the assignment, and you're having to hold in mind a potential piece of information while also holding in mind the essay question that you're supposed to answer, and then trying to maneuver that in your brain into a relevant point that you can write down. So can you see that if your working memory is impacted, it can be quite hard to study? And as you're moving through a qualification, you are expected to do more things, right? So if you are studying a subject where it's kind of essay based, or you're having to write written assignments, it goes from more simple tasks such as, describe this or explain this, or identify this. And then the tasks get harder. You're then having to critically analyze, and you're having to discuss and evaluate. And those harder tasks require more working memory capacity. So when we learn something new, we have to hold bits in working memory long enough for it to make sense or for us to do something with it. But our working memory is really small and it can become easily overwhelmed. And so this is useful for all students because, again, we have a limit to our working memory, but this is specifically, really relevant for students who have learning differences that impact their working memory. So the amount of information they can hold or their ability to process and work with that information. So in this context, we can think about something called cognitive load. And this is how much you are asking your brain's working memory to juggle at once. And cognitive overload happens when too much is coming in too fast or in a disorganized way. And a kind of real life example of this is if you are someone who drives, then you might recognize this, that if you're driving somewhere new and maybe you've got your sat nav on and it's telling you where to go, or you're just looking at the screen to see where to go, that as you get to kind of tricky parts where you don't know where you are and you're very much relying on this sat nav, do you find that you turn the music down? Or if there's people in the car and they're talking, you tell them to be quiet? I definitely have to do that. And it seems odd when you're not aware of this concept of working memory and cognitive load. It's like, how is it that turning down music is going to help me see better? But that's the idea, that working memory, your brain is trying to use its working memory to follow instructions and drive you down a road while doing all of the things you need to do to drive properly. And it's also trying to listen in to the music or the radio or the people in the car. And so that idea of turning it down or telling people to be quiet is a way of reducing the cognitive load so that you can use your working memory more effectively, and then you can actually do the thing more easily. So I'm going to share some strategies in a second, but there are two types of cognitive load. I'm just going to tell you them, but you don't really need to hold on to this too much. Again, I don't want to overload your working memory here, but we have intrinsic load and extraneous load. So internal, external. Intrinsic load is the actual complexity of what you're learning. So like I said, if you're trying to, critically analyze or evaluate, if you're trying to do a tricky studying task, that's to do with intrinsic load. And then we've got extraneous load or external or extra, anything that makes learning harder than it needs to be. So that would be distractions, or that would be trying to work with unclear instructions, or if you're kind of taking things from a textbook and the textbook is written in a really confusing way and there's just lots of stuff on this textbook and images and boxes with other information, and it's just a bit overwhelming of where do I go, right? So there's those two types. So managing cognitive load is about being kinder to your brain. So rather than seeing this, stuckness as a sign that you're not learning properly, or that you're not good at learning, or that you need to just try harder, we actually want to think, right, how can I be kinder to my brain in this moment? And this is really very fixable. There's a lot we can do. And the thing that I find interesting is when I work with students who have working memory difficulties, so that tends to be students with ADHD, students with dyslexia, can also have working memory difficulties, and just in general, right? That's the idea of kind of neurodivergence being on a spectrum. It is likely that lots of students who would not fit the criteria for a diagnosis might still have working memory difficulties. And as I mentioned, stressors in life, mental health, physical health issues can also impact your working memory abilities. And what I notice is when I work with students who have these difficulties, they are, through no fault of their own, making their life more difficult for themselves. They are trying to use their working memory all the time, right? I was talking to one student and asked, how do they manage their tasks in their studying, right? Just, is it on paper? Do you use an app? Do you use something digital? What do you do? And she said, well, I just remember them. And I was like, right, okay. So multiple times a day, 10 times a day, you're like running through a task list in your mind of everything you need to do. And she was like, yeah. I said, right, so do you think that's maybe taking up space in your working memory, space that you could actually be using to do the thing, right? When you're studying, if you're constantly running a task list, then that's like, getting a computer to just run a program, trying to get your computer to do a backup while you're asking it to also edit a video. Like, you're asking it to do too many things for no real reason. Trying to remember things all the time, or going from, like having like multiple documents open where you're compiling notes. All of these things are potentially making your working memory work harder for no reason. And I definitely noticed this when I was doing my final assignment, which was a mammoth portfolio. The amount of words I wrote was just wild. I could have written another book. But I fell into cognitive overload writing my own portfolio because I was trying to edit as I wrote. So there was very strict criteria of how I had to write up my sessions and the format and the structure of it. And I was holding it in my mind of, make sure you write it like this. Make sure you include that. Make sure you do this. And I was using up all my working memory on holding the instructions in my mind, when what would have been easier is if I had focused on the writing first, and actually got the words down and trust that I could shape it later. What also ended up working was coming up with a list of questions for me to answer. So, okay, here's the questions I need to answer in my write-up to help me structure my thought process. And then after, I'll put it all in the right structure. So I ended up kind of creating a template for myself. All of these things were to try and support my working memory, to make sure that I just wasn't having to overload it. So the idea of like closing down programs, closing down tabs, like there's that saying, isn't there, of like having too many tabs open in your mind. And right now, my Google Chrome has a lot of tabs open. And so we can try and think of our working memory as that of, we can only have so many tabs open. And so if we want to make progress in our study sessions, if we want to get more done in less time, we need to remove as many things as possible that are impacting us and just close these tabs down. So I want to just, end this episode with you actually knowing what to do differently. So I'm going to give you lots of ideas now on ways that you can reduce cognitive load. So intrinsic load, that's about making the material easier to process. You can break down longer instructions into shorter tasks. So if you have an essay question and like the guidance of what you need to do in this essay, what we don't want to do is just hold in mind this like singular question, the singular sentence or a few sentences that tell us what to do. We want to break it down into super, super small tasks. And the same with your task list, right? Don't just put proofread essay as your task. What if you were to break that down into micro tasks, which means you're not having to think about your instructions here of, okay, what am I actually doing to proofread? And you instead break it down into, okay, I'm going to check that every in-text reference has a full reference. I'm going to check that the font, like type and size and color, is the same for the entire document. I'm going to check that every single paragraph has a link back to the question. Can you see how taking it from one long task of just proofread my essay into shorter tasks means that it's easier for you to follow and you're able to devote more of your brain space to just doing the thing rather than thinking about how you're doing the thing? Another thing you can do here as like a trick is to rewrite tasks as questions so that you're clearer on what's being asked. So let's say you had an assignment where the question was like, reflect on what happened in the group project and what you would do differently next time. That statement, it's a little bit vague and it just hasn't got a lot of impetus behind it, a lot of momentum. And so what I find useful is rewriting tasks as questions, because it engages that curious part of your brain to actually start answering them. So that question, that task could, or that like statement could become two easier for you to digest questions, which is what happened, good and bad, in the group project? And then another question, what would I do differently next time? So those broken down into questions, it's a lot easier for your mind to just latch on to what you need to do and then do it. Another strategy, which I mentioned about my own portfolio, is separating the writing from the editing. Now, I'm going to go into more detail about this on another episode at some point, but when we're working on anything written, we are either doing one of two things. We're either writing or we are editing. And writing is a creative process, it uses a different part of the brain. And then editing is more analytical. And so what sometimes happens and why we end up feeling overloaded, why we end up feeling overwhelmed, is we try and do them at the same time. And that looks like, as you're writing, you get this like brain freeze and you suddenly just don't feel like you can get any words onto the page, and you literally halt yourself, right? So you're writing half a sentence, you don't like how it's sounding, so you just kind of delete it all, start again. You feel like you've said however 12 times already, and so you kind of stop, minimize word, open up thesaurus.com and try and find another word for however, and then that potentially derails you or kind of sends you down a rabbit hole. You're worrying about like, oh, should I say this thing here or should I say it later? Where should it go? Should I move it around? Okay, this doesn't sound right. I think I need to find a reference. I think I know, blah, blah, blah. Like you're trying to edit when actually you just need to write. And so one thing that you can do to help with that is just think, how can I keep the flow going? How can I keep, my full working memory capacity, whatever full is for you, on the task at hand, rather than bits of my working memory being held up on editing. And so things that I like to do is I leave placeholders and I just keep going. So I will happily just write however every single time that I want to use a word like that, and I'll come back to it later. If there is a word or I can't think of a word, if I can't think of it in like a second, I'll just put a question mark or a capital X. If there is a sentence that I'm just not happy with at all, I might put it in red and just move on. If I know that I should find a reference here, like I should find some external piece of evidence to back up my claim, then I will just quickly maybe add a comment to the Word doc and just put find reference. So can you see how just doing those things would allow you to just keep going, which is supportive of your cognitive load and your working memory? Other things you can do is to work in one document rather than moving between lots of different documents of notes here and ideas here and plans here and drafts here. Just working in one space allows you to kind of keep things front and center. If you're having to switch between documents, part of your working memory is focused on what's in that other document, what do I need to remember? And that's just taking up it unnecessarily. When if you could have everything you need in one, bit of your vision, like one page that you can see, it's going to be a lot easier for your brain to work with that information. You're almost extending your working memory onto a page, which is great, right? You've then got more working memory to play with. So then there's things like the extraneous load. So removing unnecessary mental clutter. And these, some of these things, right? But I think when you can understand why we should do them, I think it helps. Same with anything. If we know the why behind it, then we're more likely to follow it through. So making sure that your study space is clear, right? You've not got a load of crap all over your desk, but also your digital space. If you, go to open your laptop or your computer and there's just stuff everywhere, there's like files and folders and documents and applications open that you don't need right now, close it all down, making sure that you've saved things. Just start again. I quite often just start again. I know that like those tabs, I bookmark things if I need them, but I know that I can find them again. I'll just close everything. I'll close down every single document. I'll sometimes even close down Spotify because it's making me feel overloaded. And I just start again with a blank slate. In the same vein there, we've got creating an anti-distraction environment. So that will be doing something with your phone so that it is not going to cause an issue and take up your working memory. It's not going to add cognitive load, because if you're thinking about going on your phone, that's again, it's part of your working memory. If you then actually, pick up your phone, if you keep picking up your phone, or you keep hearing your phone and notifications coming in, or you feel the vibration of a notification coming in, it's just taking up, it's like adding to the cognitive load, which is impacting your studying. And with this kind of stuff, like, I'm sure you all want to spend less time at your desk, but get more done. And so these are the strategies to do it. And it's all with this idea of, I only have so many tabs I can work with. So let's actually use as many of them as possible on the studying, not the other stuff. And another way you can do that, like I said about working in one document, if you can, if you don't already have one, like a spare monitor, it is a game changer. Like, I used to work on like just my small laptop, and it's really hard if you're going between programs and like tabs. Like, sometimes you can't avoid that, right? If you've got online materials or an online article or a PDF article, and then your Word doc that you're working in, it's just overloading your working memory. So you can obviously split screen, so have, half your screen for one document, half for another. If you can get hold of a second monitor and you have the space for it, it's definitely something I would look into getting. Like, you don't have to be like a gamer or a programmer to benefit from a second monitor. I got mine from my old work when they were getting rid of them. But like, see if someone has one you could borrow. You can get them really cheap secondhand. And just have a go at the idea of having like, online materials on one and then the document you're working in the other. It can really help the brain. And again, like chunking those big tasks into smaller ones, just so that it's also more motivating that way, because you make progress quicker. And then there's kind of bonus strategies, I guess, that are going to help you with this feeling of cognitive overload, which is take some breaks. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you feel like your brain is just like vibrating in your head and you don't know what to do and you can't seem to see the wood for the trees, take a break, and then you can ask yourself, right, have I got too many tabs open? Either like literally, and your laptop is just a mess of programs and tabs, or kind of metaphorically, have you got too many tabs open? Are you trying to kind of plan your like work tasks for the week? Are you thinking about like an issue in your personal life? Like, are you trying to do too many things at once? So if you're feeling that, like those symptoms, I guess, of cognitive overload, take breaks and then come back to it and see if there's a way forward that will reduce the load, and reach out for support. If you're trying to do that idea of like chunking tasks down, turning big instructions into small ones, turning instructions into questions, if you've tried to decode them and it's just not making sense to you, ask your tutor or your lecturer for clarification, because sometimes actually that's the way forward, right? If you're trying to answer a question and you literally don't have the answer because maybe the wording of a question is quite vague, then sometimes the best thing to do after you've had a go is just to reach out for help, and actually getting a simpler instruction or a clearer instruction back is going to then be supportive of your cognitive load in the long run. So I hope this episode was helpful. And I really want you to hold in mind that the two things, the metaphor of your brain being like a browser with 37 tabs open, that this feeling of overwhelm and this like frozenness of not being able to focus or make progress is not a sign that you're a bad student, right? It's not a sign that you need to just try harder. It's not a sign that you need to just like chain yourself to your desk until you get it. It's actually a sign of cognitive overload, right? There's a real term for it, and there are ways forward. Okay, you can make it easier on yourself when you know a little bit about how memory works and that we are all limited in our capacity for our working memory, the amount of things that we can hold in our mind and actually do and work with them. And obviously, like I said, that capacity will vary between students, but we all will experience this. Once you know that that is a real phenomena, then you can start to find strategies to overcome it. And hopefully with this episode, I've shared lots of different strategies, and 1 or 2 or 10 of them make sense for your situation and for you to have a go. So I would definitely invite you this week to think and hold that in mind of like, right, have I got too many tabs open? How can I close down the tabs in my brain to allow myself a better chance of making progress with this task? So I hope you've found this episode helpful. If you are watching it on YouTube, please leave a comment with a key takeaway. And if you are listening to it, then come over to Instagram and make a story about it, or just send me a DM, because I would love to hear from you, because I love doing this podcast and it's been a part of my life and my business for like almost 5 years now. And yeah, I'm excited for it to kind of come back and be a weekly thing again. So yes, I will be back now with weekly episodes, and I'll be sharing a bit more about what I'm up to. And I'll be sharing more about the fact that in May, so next month, I'm going to be running a new workshop series on essay writing. I'm very, very excited because I'm going to bring in all of my knowledge from this qualification on how to teach study skills in the best way for everyone, in the most inclusive way for everyone. So keep an eye and an ear out for more details. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.